Hello, everybody, and welcome back to This Week in Privacy, our weekly series where we cover the latest updates with what we're working on in the Privacy Guides community, and this week's top stories in data privacy and cybersecurity. Privacy Guides is a non-profit which researches and shares privacy-related information and facilitates a community on our forum and matrix where people can ask questions and get advice about staying private online and preserving their digital rights. But before we dive into this week's show, here's a rundown of how everything will be laid out. First, we'll start by covering site updates. Then we'll discuss the top stories in data privacy and cybersecurity. Then we'll explore some of the trending posts on the Privacy Guides forum. And finally, we'll answer some viewer questions. So if you do have a question for us, definitely leave that in the forum thread, or you can also leave it in the YouTube chat as well. And we'll also be checking other platforms. So if you're watching on other platforms too, thank you so much. But with that being said, let's kick things straight off with the site updates this week. This week, I'm joined by Jonah Aragon, the project director here at Privacy Guides. How are you, Jonah?
I'm doing great, Jordan. Thank you. Yeah, some site updates. We've been working on a lot of stuff this week. You may have seen some announcements we posted to the forum. We're actually hiring someone to help you out with the video production side of things. I think it'll make a big difference to the channel and hopefully help us make our videos even better. So that's exciting. There's a job posting on our forum right now, and we're taking applicants until Monday, and then we'll be going through it and getting back to everyone. We've gotten a lot of great applicants so far. So that's kind of the news with that. Definitely check that out if video stuff is interesting to you. But we aim to get going with this role pretty quickly. So hopefully we'll have some more news on that soon. But that's what's in development. The other thing we just posted about, I just put out a call to volunteers. I don't know if anybody feels social media minded at all. Even though we do like put out a lot of content and videos and articles all the time, most of what we do at Privacy Guides is all volunteer based and community driven. All of the stuff that we do on our website, getting our recommendations together, and then all of the stuff we do on the forum and our other communities online. We have a team of fantastic volunteers constantly doing all of that stuff. I think, as a lot of people might expect from a privacy-minded community, not a ton of us on the team are super into social media, right? So that's been a bit of a challenge, I think, for us in terms of outreach and getting more people to read into this stuff and find out about privacy and the benefits of having technology that actually respects you when you use it instead of sending all your data to big tech. And we have a ton of articles that we want to get shared with people who haven't read them yet. So our social media outreach plan is to post more consistently and post these articles and other stuff that is shared within our forum to social media platforms like Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook and all the usual stuff that people are on. We want to meet people where they are. And to that end, anyone who thinks that they could help out with this as far as posting, we have a system basically now where we can onboard volunteers to post new drafts for social media posts, and then one of us on the team kind of approves them and adds them to the queue, so we can kind of stack up a bunch of posts and make sure that all of our Privacy Guide socials are constantly up to date and monitored. So if that sounds interesting to you, and you want to get some social media experience, or you just want to help us out as a project, try and spread the good word of privacy and digital rights, definitely get in touch with us. There's an announcement post on our forum about this as well with more details. But it's something we could really use a lot of help with. It doesn't require you to have any personal social media accounts yourself at all. We have a website that we can invite you to access all of these. So yeah, that'd be our big ask, I think, of the community this week. A lot of stuff. Otherwise, yeah, a lot of the discussions I've been having with people this week have been planning for next year mostly. So we have some stuff in the works that I hope people are excited about, and we will try and get that published soon. But I think that is most of what's going on my end. How are things going on the video side of things, Jordan?
Yeah, no, that's really exciting stuff. I think, yeah, we've got a couple of videos in the works at this point, and um, just in the sort of like early phases, I guess. We're working on a video on chat control because, as we'll talk about later on the show, there's definitely some more updates on that regard. And we want to make sure we put something out that's going to inform people and make sure people are aware of what's going on and how they can actually make their voices be heard. So we are getting in touch with somebody to do an interview for that video, which hopefully will be out before um, the actual vote is being passed again to decide whether chat control will actually happen. So that's something in the works. We're also working on a threat modeling uh, course, basically a couple of lessons about like it's one of the main questions that we get is like how do you actually make decisions that are applicable to you and not go overboard, because we do see it
Right.
quite a lot in our community. Like people are just they're very enthusiastic, which is great, but sometimes those things can those techniques that you use or the software that you use or the tools that you use are too extreme for your use case. So we're trying to make it an accessible entry point for people, available to everybody, so that they can basically decide and understand why they're actually taking the actions that they are. So working on the first lesson of that at the moment, which should be coming out relatively soon. I'm hoping next week for our members. So definitely look out for that. But that sort of covers what we're working on the video side of things.
Sweet. Yeah, that all sounds exciting. Sorry, I just had a technical issue with my computer. Part of the reason we were late today, folks, is because I have a new office set up and I'm trying to get things set up. And sometimes things just aren't working properly, but hopefully it's not too much of a problem. Why don't we move into some of the news that we've seen in the privacy and security space? Do you have a story you want to start us off with?
Yeah, definitely. So this week, like the top story that we thought was quite pertinent for people to know about, which you might have seen as the, I guess, thumbnail and title of the story this week, is a criminal complaint being brought against the facial recognition company called Clearview AI. So I guess if you haven't really heard of this company, they're kind of, I guess we can say, notorious at this point, for basically collecting people's like facial um, recognition scans. And uh, they basically I'll quote from the article here. Today, NOYB, which is basically a digital rights organization in Austria, based in Europe, has filed a criminal complaint against Clearview AI and its managers. The facial recognition company is known for scraping billions of photos of Europeans and people around the world, and selling its facial recognition system to law enforcement and state actors. Several EU data protection authorities have already imposed fines and bans on Clearview AI, but the US company simply ignores these actions, given the lack of enforcement. So I think the main thing that was kind of interesting about this is if they're bringing a like criminal complaint against Clearview AI, there's a possibility that the people who run this company might actually face jail time. So that's like kind of a big factor here, and especially it's kind of setting a good precedent because in a lot of cases they've been banned from entering certain countries or operating in certain countries like Australia and Canada, for example, because they're just wholesale collecting people's information without any oversight. So it's definitely good to see NOYB taking a really strong stance against Clearview AI in this case.
Yeah, Clearview AI has they've come under fire in a lot of different places, so it is good to also see this tackled in the EU. I know back in 2020, Clearview AI had to stop offering their facial recognition software in Canada because the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada basically said that they were investigating that and they decided to voluntarily shut down. It's definitely a big concern when we see all of these cameras being put out. These are used by a ton of companies, not just law enforcement, but we see it in terms of like security systems for retail stores and that sort of thing. So it is a mass system that a lot of different operators and camera companies contribute to, and that really can lead to a lot of very severe privacy invasions that people probably don't even really think about because it used to be a model back before like the internet and all of these AI companies and facial recognition companies that, if a store had video surveillance, it was probably being stored on a drive somewhere in that store, right? And so you can't really it was difficult to track people between different locations. It required some real investigative work of having to go to this place, have a warrant presumably or some sort of legal process to get all of this information. Whereas now, with something like Clearview AI, a lot of people are voluntarily sending this data to this company, and they are kind of running big data processes behind the scenes to collect all of that and really tie things together in a way that is pretty unprecedented and definitely dangerous in terms of privacy. So, yeah, it's definitely good that Clearview AI is coming under fire legally, and hopefully data protection agencies and authorities in the EU uh, side side against Clearview AI and take action against this because it's not a system that should really be in widespread use. There needs to be some regulations and bans against this kind of technology. It's just far too easy to abuse.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think like the worst part about this sort of thing is they've sort of just been dodging fines and sort of trying to avoid accountability. So it's really good to see that NOYB is like taking a strong stance on this. And um yeah, it's possible. I think I was reading a bit into this, and it looks like, there's pretty big fines if they are found to have been illegally collecting people's information, which is, I think, kind of a given, given their history. They don't seem to really care about that sort of stuff. They don't really follow data protection laws. They sort of just do whatever they want and ignore fines and just, collect people's information wholesale. So, um, I know I'm happy that they're finally getting some sort of retribution, I guess, for their terrible practices so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll see how this plays out, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, let's take a look at our next story here. This was reported by Apple Insider, who says that ads are likely to come to Apple Maps in 2026. Um, there are many reasons to prefer Apple Maps to vastly more successful Google Maps, says this article, but reportedly the lure of advertising revenue has finally made Apple decide to remove one of them. And yeah, with that statement, I would totally agree that that's probably one of the main reasons people use Apple Maps. I think a lot of Apple's appeal in the past, if you aren't concerned about open source or privacy or security or anything like that, I think a lot of people are happy with the lack of advertisements in general. But we've definitely seen over recent years that Apple has been adding more and more ads and building more ad networks into multiple services. I mean, they recently relaunched ads in their app store, and with this change, I can see a lot of people getting pretty upset about this. I mean, it's crazy to me that a company can, charge a premium for a premium experience and then later decide to change their mind. But we've seen this not only from Apple, but also with other companies, even in their high-end products. We've seen this with Samsung recently adding ads to their fridges. So now this extremely expensive appliance that you bought for your kitchen is now going to be a billboard for the highest bidder every time you go get a glass of water. It's a crazy situation to be in, and it's really unfortunate. I think if Apple, I use Apple products in general personally. I still use an iPhone as my primary device most of the time, and I think that this will definitely be another factor that's pushes me away from it. I've been kind of trying to avoid a lot of Apple stuff for a while and use it less and less because I don't think they're heading in the right direction as a company. And with Maps, I know we recommend a lot of different open source alternatives on our website that you could definitely check out instead of this. There's some uh, new open source map applications that are coming out recently as well that have been discussed on our forum. So the good news is I think there's a lot of good alternatives for people to look into, but yeah, it's it's a bad world in my opinion that everything is just going to be plastered with ads. It seems like nobody is really safe in on the big tech side of things.
Yeah, it's really kind of sad because yeah, that is like one thing that I remember Google rolled out that a lot of people were kind of frustrated with because there was a lot of times when you would like look for something and it would just show you an alternative destination that's sponsored or having like little things on the map that are just like popping out as sponsored listings. I guess we'll see how this looks. Apple seems to be moving more and more towards advertising, like we've seen with Apple News has got ads, and you know the App Store now has like sponsored sections. So I don't know. It seems like Apple is kind of moving to make as much money as they can, and it kind of makes sense why they would want to start adding ads into everything. So I mean, I don't think it's particularly surprising that they're adding ads to Apple Maps. And yeah, personally, I do use Apple Maps because I do use an iPhone, but I think a lot of the alternatives at this point, like the ones we have listed on our website, which I think is organic maps, is
Yeah.
it's just not quite reaching the feature parity that needs to be there for a lot of people. Um, Personally, I don't drive, so like if you drive, I mean, if you drive, I guess it can work pretty well, but personally I've tried organic maps before and it doesn't have like things like public transit, like bike specific paths and all sorts of stuff like that, which Apple Maps does have that makes it a lot easier to navigate. If it just had some more integrations like that, I think it could be accessible for a lot more people. But I think it's definitely worth giving it a try because Organic Maps is available on iOS, Android. So, I mean, if you want to kind of give an alternative a try and you do drive primarily, then I think Organic Maps could work okay. I don't really have any experience with driving with it. Have you ever tried it, Jonah?
For driving, yeah, it works well. There's another app that we recommend as well, OSM and I don't know if that's how you say it, OSMAND. That's available on both Android and iOS, so that could be another one to look into if you're an iOS user. All of that public transport stuff and mapping in general, I think, is a really tricky thing for people to solve in the open source community to solve, obviously, through OpenStreetMap data, which both of our recommendations heavily utilize. A lot of that work is already done, but it is a massive effort. I mean, Google and Apple have both invested so heavily into collecting as much mapping data as possible. I mean, they have fleets of cars that drive around cities and map all of this out, literally. They're doing a lot of it themselves, and that kind of investment it's really hard to make like a great alternative. But I think, especially depending on where you are, these alternatives can work well. Stuff like turn-by-turn navigation, stuff like public transport, route planning, that is available, especially in organic maps in certain cities and locations. So it may work for you, but it probably not, but not for you, Jordan, in you in your place. Um, so yeah, it's a hard problem. It's similar to the problem I think that YouTube has. I think personally, I think that Google Maps and YouTube are probably the hardest services to replicate in Google's ecosystem, and the same would apply to Apple Maps, of course. It's an insanely tricky problem to map out the entire world. And so, while most of Google services can be, you can easily find an open source alternative, or you can use something like Proton, and other companies are building ecosystems. These ones I think are going to be tricky to solve. But I definitely think uh, for basic map users, these are good alternatives, and they are really nice because you can use them completely offline. So if that's important to you, or if you want to save data, because not everyone has unlimited data, there's a lot of benefits to these maps, and I think trying these alternatives, seeing if they work for you, is definitely a good idea. Uh, but yeah, it's really unfortunate that this is happening to Apple Maps, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it's not directly taking away features that have already existed, which I guess is good. It'd be interesting if they ever added like a more premium option or something that removed the ads or I don't know, avoided that entirely. but I'm sure that's something they'll eventually decide to do.
Oh,
Um,
jeez. Apple
but
Maps Plus.
yeah, maybe they add it to like a Apple One plan or something. I don't know, but that's kind of awful. But
Yeah.
I think it's good points you brought up about like the offline access. I think that's really important. I'd just caution people though, don't use this for like if you're gonna try it, don't use it for like time critical stuff because I don't know. In the past, I've tried it and yeah, it didn't end up taking me to the right place or issues like that, or it would not calculate things correctly. So I'd just be careful with using that. But definitely give it a try. It depends on like the quality of the maps because it does rely, like Jonah said, it relies on like the OpenStreetMap database, which is kind of maintained by the community. So hello, and the if the community can like come together and actually build on those maps, then you can also contribute to the maps as well. I know there's a lot of people that like to add like the areas that are around them to add more, you know, POIs and to add roads that potentially may not be listed. So you can definitely check that out as well and try and contribute to make it better because that's probably the only good alternative we have right now to Apple and Google's mapping software. Yeah. I always thought it was OSM and, but I don't know. Yeah. Yeah, it's a classic open source project naming issue. Organic maps is pretty good. Co-maps. Yeah. Hello? It's okay. We're just having a slight technical difficulty here. It looks like oh, say something, Jonah.
Can you hear me
There we go. You're
now?
back.
Oh boy. I don't know what is going on with these headphones. I have a new setup for a microphone that is in the mail. We'll hopefully get that set up. Give me 1 second here. Here, do you want to introduce this story?
Yes, definitely. So the Danish Council presidency is backing away from pushing for mandatory detection orders in legislative proposal that aims to tackle the spread of online child sexual abuse material, the country's justice minister said on Thursday. So I think the most important thing we think about when we're talking about this is they're talking about mandatory detection orders. So they're basically saying that there's a possibility that this could be an optional thing that happens where they'll scan certain people's devices. So I think you need to be very careful about when we read what they're actually saying to actually interpret what they're saying because I did see quite a lot of comments about this saying, well, they're saying that they won't do mandatory scanning. They won't scan every person's device, but they might have a way to enable that on certain people's devices to check if they have that uh, child CSAM material on their device. So let's just be very careful about what they say because I do feel like they are kind of being a bit sneaky with that. Um, so basically, quoting from the article again, early in their presidency, Denmark has revived a controversial provision In the draft law, that would mean online platforms such as messaging apps could be served with mandatory CSAM detection orders, including services protected by end-to-end encryption. However, opposition from several other EU countries derailed any agreement in the Council. So I think definitely some of that was to do with people using the Fight Chat Control website, contacting their MEPs, really putting a lot of pressure on them, because I don't think that we would have seen such a turnaround from a lot of countries, and it's good to see that that was derailed. But today, and that's on, this article was posted on, not sure what, it doesn't actually say. Oh, here it is, October 30th. So that's the day that this was posted. Today, Danish Justice Minister Peter Hummelgaard, hopefully I'm saying that correctly, told local press that the council presidency would move away from mandatory detection orders and instead support CSAM detections remaining voluntary. So I feel like they're trying to do like a middle ground thing here. I think that's it doesn't really make sense either way. It doesn't really make sense to have it as a voluntary thing. What do you think, Jonah?
It's definitely an improvement. Hopefully people can hear me now. Before the compared to the previous situation where it was going to be mandatory, the issues with this remain kind of from back when Apple kind of first proposed this technology to be used across all of their devices. It just creates a lot of security issues when you're doing this kind of client-side scanning, especially when you're dealing with sensitive data that needs to remain encrypted or end-to-end encrypted messengers like Signal, because people communicate all sorts of sensitive information on their phones. We're talking, financial records or medical records, all that stuff that people probably don't want leaked. And creating these systems that run on your device and potentially report to others, it's definitely the start of a slippery slope, and it creates real security flaws because you're now inviting other people to potentially look at that information. So even these voluntary systems shouldn't be encouraged, and I do fear that, if the EU government does encourage these companies to pick up this voluntary client-side scanning system, it will get developed and it will be widely implemented um, across different platforms. It's just, it's yeah, it just opens the door to a lot of different technologies, and it's uh, you have to put your you have to draw a line in the sand somewhere, and I think that keeping devices that you purchased and software that you completely control on your end under your complete control instead of sharing control with others, is a line that we have to draw with technology. This is a completely different situation than like a photo backup provider scanning their servers for photos. Because if you're trusting them with that data and you're not encrypting it and you're sending it to them, um, it is kind of their right to know what you're doing with their computers, right? So that's one thing, server side scanning. But client-side scanning completely changes, the entire dynamic, and just like, how I think it's not a great thing for all of these AI features to be implemented in web browsers, for example, or for things like DRM to be implemented in browsers where they can control what media content your browser can actually play, which is a battle that I think the tech community lost a long time ago and is probably, um that probably started a lot of these problems, if we're being honest. But that's kind of have to move on past that. But I think that that sort of dynamic where we now move some of those responsibilities that a server would typically have to the client side, I think it's just dangerous, and consumers shouldn't accept it. And you should definitely seek out alternatives if you know that this stuff is being implemented on your devices, because you can either own something and it be yours, or it's controlled by somebody else, and then you don't really have a say. And I don't think that that's a situation that people should be in.
Yeah, it's definitely a worrying precedent here. It does look like we're currently dropping frames on the stream. I'm not sure entirely what happened. Hello? Um,
I can hear you.
okay, I'm not sure what's happening. The bitrate just suddenly tanked, so hopefully people can still hear what's going on. Um, looks like we're back. Okay. Um, yeah, no, this is definitely a sort of it's something we've talked about for a long time, and it's something we do want to like make a more full featured video about because I do think it's pretty important that people understand why this is so problematic. And especially, I don't think we should be settling for like half measures here where, the Danish council is saying like, we want to have this become a voluntary detection system. I don't think this should be exist. And I think that a lot of these, it's kind of unfortunate because it did seem like this was getting close to being passed, and then there was a couple of, I think Germany started opposing it, and at that point, then we basically saw that it kind of turned the whole thing around and it got dismissed. But I think putting through this like voluntary half measure definitely has a possibility for it to go through. It's still problematic, like Jonah said. It's scanning of your device that you own, which is a problem. And even if it's voluntary, it can still be abused for lots of terrible purposes that I feel like we've talked about, quite a lot of different reasons why this is problematic. And I don't think it's an
Yeah.
improvement if it's voluntary.
I mean, at the end of the day, politicians are coming up with a lot of reasons why this technology should be adopted. And it's just important to remember that we can't trade, um, a long-term safety of people and long-term control of our technology and all of that stuff for short-term gains or protections because what they're making, what they want to scan for, it's obviously completely illegal now, and that is the problem. But once the technology exists, it will be abused, either by future governments or by whoever else is in power. The laws are so different around the world, and they don't necessarily make a lot of sense, or they might not be things that American tech companies might want to enforce in some cases, but they will be forced to if this technology exists and it becomes the standard. Um, because because why not? Like why wouldn't a government like try and take as much control as possible? And we already see this happening. In so many places, especially, I mean, this gets back to the age verification topic, right? Where we now see sites that are clearly not adult content being blocked under these age verification guidelines because um, just because they can. It's a censorship tool at the end of the day, and people just can't be fooled by the excuses that politicians use. Saying that it's only gonna go after the most heinous illegal material they can think of because that just isn't the case in the long term, and historically, it's always proven not to be the case, so it's not gonna be different now, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It can be used against all sorts of people that have legitimate use cases, and yeah, it doesn't really change how things are going to look in the future. But I feel like we've talked about this for a while, so why don't we move on to the next story here?
Sure thing.
We definitely have
Sorry,
quite a lot of
I've
stories
lost the
this
doc
week
here.
to get through, but yeah, no worries, no worries.
Here we go. This one's reported by the Colorado Sun. The headline is, "After police used flock cameras to accuse a Denver woman of theft, she had to prove her own innocence." Christiana Elser spent days collecting evidence from apps on her phone to dashcam footage in her vehicle to prove her whereabouts. Um, so this is basically a story about how this kind of relates to the story we started off with originally, but this is a different company. These flock cameras are also kind of working together and working with law enforcement to track people down and use potentially faulty information, faulty facial recognition tools, and artificial intelligence-powered license plate readers that do not always get things right. But the problem with these AI tools, we've seen it in cases like this. We also see it um, in situations around the world where they're used by governments or even militaries uh, to justify various actions. They don't always get it right, but they present this information as if it is correct and as if it is factual. And even if these AI companies are saying like, oh, you should double check this information, or you should manually review it, or you need to do all this evidence collecting yourself, we're just pointing you in the right direction, right? That isn't what's happening in a lot of cases. People do take artificial intelligence results at face value, um, and they run with it in a lot of cases. And when it gets it wrong, which happens all the time and has happened in this case, for example, it can have very uh, devastating consequences to people's lives. I mean, this causes real problems for everyday people. It's not just theoretical. Was there something in this article you wanted to highlight, Jordan?
Yeah, I think we can sort of talk about exactly like how these. I think we didn't really talk about what exactly is flock and like how exactly does this actually work in practice? Because
Yeah, so Flock is a set of basically license plate reader cameras that law enforcement agencies can set up around cities or whatever, and it's artificial intelligence powered, so it can detect people's license plates as they're driving around and also works with all the other cameras to kind of trace their location and really cover exactly where they've been in theory. Um, so that's kind of the situation. We're seeing it pop up more and more in a lot of different cities. Basically, this one was in Denver, but even with these protests, we still see it pretty widely implemented. Um, yeah, this article says that there's more than 8,000 cameras across the U.S. actually. So it is a quickly growing mass surveillance tool that's being used, and exactly like Clearview AI, it's not being used with a lot of care. It's not being used only under certain circumstances or only like when it's part of a official investigation and there's a warrant and everything, and people are actually like trying to hunt somebody down. All of these mass connected networks make it really easy to basically just enter a license plate number and track any vehicle, and it gets abused quite frequently. And there's not a lot of safeguards involved. So it's a dangerous it's definitely a dangerous system to implement, but we do see law enforcement implementing it pretty widely across the United States.
yeah, okay. That's like a good explanation of how that works exactly. I think like the main thing that we think about like when we when we think of these technologies that are sort of like mass collecting people's information like and sort of using it to accuse them of crimes, it's like it's almost like everyone is a suspect and nobody is free from this sort of massive collection. I know it's like a lot of these camera systems they're just collecting everything like indiscriminately, like every single person where they are, where their car is being seen is basically being collected. Like Jonah said, it's not like they check it specifically for one person. It's like always checking everybody's license plate and logging that as their car being seen there, right? Like it's quite invasive and it's you would expect some level of privacy if you're, you know, driving around in your car. You'd be like, "Oh, I'm going to go this way." Oh, well, you wouldn't expect that every single like movement that you're making is being collected and stored for further, you know, for access that can be made by law enforcement or the government. Um, and in a lot of cases, that can be used, like in this story, to accuse you of a crime or accuse you of something that's, you know, not actually true. But I think this is sort of a another one of these things that it just needs to be pushed back against and stopped from being implemented because it's really just a tool of mass surveillance at this point. And I think there was someone who did link this. There was a couple of videos and things on our forum that Purple Dime had linked. And basically, Lewis Rossman did like a video about it that I think went kind of viral, I guess, because I think a lot of people don't realize that this this is happening, and they don't really realize that their location and their movements are being tracked like this. And yeah, so it's kind of ridiculous that this woman had to basically um, prove her own innocence, even though she was being accused of a crime which she didn't even commit.
Yeah. It's a lot of power that we're giving to law enforcement, and in today's society in particular, I think a lot of people definitely feel like it's a guilty until proven innocent situation, which obviously shouldn't be the ideal. But with um how quickly news about charges spread, like if she was formally accused by the police of these charges, even if it wasn't proven in court and she had all the evidence to prove she was nowhere near the scene of the crime that took place, that could have potentially devastating uh consequences for it in her personal life or in her professional life. I think this article mentioned that she works in for a financial institution, so even if there's potentially an allegation of theft, that could be extremely problematic for her career. And so that's the danger, I think, of these systems is that because they purport to do all of this investigation for law enforcement, I think they get abused far too often. Um, and it's very problematic that we see this and that people have to take such extreme steps to prove their innocence when that should kind of be the assumption from the beginning. In this case, she actually used some other tracking tools that she used Google's timeline feature on her phone and some dash cam footage to prove that she wasn't at the location when it happened and to prove her whereabouts, but that isn't going to be accessible to everyone. And it really shouldn't be something that she should have to voluntarily come forward with anyway. So yeah, it's not great.
Yeah, it's definitely like a worrying precedent of like, law enforcement being given access to a lot of these mass surveillance and like, tools that are invading people's privacy. Like I've heard there's more use of like Celebrite and Grey Key and all these sort of tools by law enforcement. It's kind of becoming a kind of scary landscape for people because yeah, there's a lot of these mass surveillance tools being employed by law enforcement, especially in the US, but I know it's definitely happening outside of the US as well. Um, but yeah, it's worrying stuff. But I feel like yeah, there was like a little small story that I thought we should have talked about this week. So if you weren't here last week, there was a story about AWS kind of crashing and burning for a couple of hours, which kicked down a lot of the internet because a lot of the internet relies on AWS US East 0 or something, and a lot of the identity infrastructure is running there. And one of the apps that was taken down was Signal. So basically, the CEO or president, I should say, of Signal, basically put out a statement saying that I'll read the quote. So basically, Meredith Whittaker, the president of Signal, said the problem is the problem here is not that Signal chose to run on AWS. The problem is the concentration of power in the infrastructure space that means that there really isn't another choice. The entire stack, practically speaking, is owned by 3 or 4 players. So, what do you think about that, Jonah?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of different takes on this whole situation. Signal's in a tricky place right now because it's always been kind of architected around these centralized services, and they've always been pretty against decentralization in general for one reason or another. That's just kind of been their philosophy, which I don't totally agree with. And I would definitely disagree with the statement that they're making that it's the only possible way forward. I posted about this a bit on Mastodon earlier, but it's completely possible to design systems like this that work in a more decentralized or federated manner and that don't rely on something like AWS or Google Cloud. But that isn't how Signal works, and that isn't how a lot of services work in their defense. And it's certainly the easiest way to kind of spin up a massive service. And so you do see a lot of tech companies relying on it. It's not, a danger to security, and it's not a huge impact on privacy either because of the end-to-end encryption that Signal uses. Part of the entire point of end-to-end encryption is that you can use these untrusted infrastructure providers to provide your service because in theory they don't have access to any of the data going through it, so it doesn't really matter what providers you use. Um, but in this case, it speaks to, I think, partially just the strange setup that Signal has here. They've said that they use multiple cloud providers, but that doesn't really explain why their service was so impacted by the downtime of a single cloud provider. Of course, we've seen AWS going down impact a lot of different industries, so they're not unique in this regard, but it's kind of worrying how non-resilient Signal turned out to be in this situation, especially when so many people rely on it. Um, and yeah, it's definitely just another win for decentralized services. That's something we talked about a lot more in depth last week. So I think if people want to hear my takes on that, you could listen to that episode. But the short of it is, putting all of your eggs in one basket with big cloud providers like AWS is probably not the best way to build a service or to scale up for the future. I think that the future is going to um, include a much larger return to local compute and decentralized compute because it's a model that just makes more sense, I think, uh, as more and more people use the internet and really rely on these services. And hopefully, um, yeah, better solutions crop up. I just think it's unfortunate that Signal is really pushing this idea that only AWS, that's the only solution they could take. It would be very difficult for Signal to switch to something else now. I can see why they're kind of stuck with where they're at because they're very entrenched in this technology stack. But to say that like a new service or a new messenger that wants to do the same thing as Signal, to say that they completely have to rely on AWS just like Signal does, I don't think that's true at all. And I think that you could definitely architect uh, a software stack around a completely different setup, or a more decentralized setup, and that would work fine. It's not the only option. I think if you're developing something new, there are a lot of different options out there that you should consider. And I think that the weaknesses of these big cloud services are a big reason to consider that because I feel like we've been seeing these outages more and more lately. It seems like they're cropping up a lot.
Yeah, I feel like it might have something to do with all the vibe coding that's going on. But yeah, I think this was more of like a DNS issue, not entirely sure what that was
It's
about.
always DNS, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's you bring up good points there. I think, yeah, I don't think that there's plenty of other options that we recommend on our website that, don't use centralized messaging servers that work perfectly fine. They have the similar capabilities to Signal, so I think those sort of platforms already exist. So I'm not sure exactly. It's not the same level of security that Signal has, obviously, because there are benefits of a centralized service. But um, yeah, I think those sort of alternatives already do exist. So it's a bit strange that, I don't know, she would say that, but I don't really have. I'm not like an expert in the field or anything. Just sort of my thoughts on it, I guess. But yeah, I feel like we sort of covered that last week. So if you're more interested in like hearing a bit more of what I had to say or Jonah had to say, definitely check out last week's episode where we covered that more in depth. But with that being said, I feel like that's sort of getting to the end of the articles this week. So why don't we move into the forum updates?
Yeah, there's been a bunch of interesting posts on the forum we've seen this week. Again, if you're checking out the form now, I would remind everyone to check out some of the announcements that we post before we get into that, either about the job opening or the volunteer opportunities to help out. And especially if you want to volunteer, there's a lot more areas where where we could use the help than just social media as well. But the forum is the best place to get involved with uh, our community in general and to learn a lot more about all of this stuff. There's a ton of smart people there. Um, let's see. One of the longer discussions. My browser's not working. Maybe you can pull one up really quick.
Yes, I can. So I'm just for the privacy of the people on the forum, I'm just not gonna pull up the actual thing here, but I'll just read what it was about. So SMSPool, if you're not aware, they're basically a service that allows you to use temporary phone numbers to verify services. So for stuff like, Discord, WhatsApp, Google, they all sort of require this SMS verification when you create an account. Not all the time, but they often do. So this is sort of a service that does verification numbers that you can use specifically for verifying your phone number. So it kind of bypasses that, which is a great privacy benefit, I guess. They're sort of been a big player in the space. They've been operating for a while. I've personally used them, never had any problems with them, but they're not really. I don't think they're anything that we recommend currently. But basically, they had an update to their terms of service, and they will now require more data for certain services. So basically, they updated their terms of service to require extra information for certain services. So I think in this case, it only applies to WhatsApp for now. And there was some speculation about, basically there was Europol basically had dismantled a SIM box operation that was linked to like cybercrime operations. So it could have been related to that being sort of a large story in the news, and they wanted to take a firmer stance. Europe wanted to take a firmer stance against these cybercrime operations. So that might be why SMS Pool is having to put these new terms of service into effect.
Yeah, SMS Pool, to clarify, the main reason we say we don't recommend them is just because we don't really have a ton of recommendations in this space on our website right now. It's definitely something we want to look into more. And so if people use these services, definitely let us know what your experiences are. I haven't used it myself, but I do know that they're active in our community and in across social media in general. And we've actually seen some responses from SMSPool. Even on our forum, they posted. They basically said it was kind of a necessary decision because the suppliers of their services wanted full KYC with ID verification. So this is kind of a compromised middle ground that they found where they identified the most abuse service, and they kind of have some of these checks in place. Like you said, is only applicable to WhatsApp. It's kind of unfortunate that the data has to be collected in the first place, but it's a tricky problem to solve, and especially when you're dealing with especially more legacy stuff like phone numbers. It's not quite as simple as like running an email provider, doing something internet native, right? There's a lot of different layers involved here, and I think it'd probably be best, if a lot of these services can move beyond requiring phone numbers and that sort of thing in the first place, because ideally something like this wouldn't really be necessary to use. But for now, it's probably one of the best solutions we have, and I think we'll probably see this sort of thing happen across the board to a lot of these different to a lot of similar providers like this.
Yeah, so just to like I guess add to what Jonah said about the information that was required, they're just looking for like first name, last name, email, intention for use. So not really that much. Definitely still,
Yeah.
personally identifiable. Don't know how they exactly check whether that information is correct. That's all I'll say on that front. But basically, I think they're not really asking for a whole lot of information. They're not asking for an ID or anything. So I wouldn't panic too much about it, but it's definitely a sad direction to go in. I'm not sure if using a temporary phone number is the greatest idea for something like WhatsApp
Yeah.
because you do need to have constant access to that number. So I'm not sure if that's really the best use case for a service like this. I've personally had used it for like Google accounts and stuff, so and that was fine. But I think for communication apps, it might not be the best use case for it anyway. So it may not affect you, but it's definitely something to note that is going on. If you do use that service, just be aware.
Yeah, it's a good thing they were able to stave off KYC for at least a little bit. But I guess we'll see if this expands to other high-risk services beyond just WhatsApp or anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so the next thing that was kind of we wanted to touch on, I guess this is not really that related to privacy, more just like I just wanted to talk about it. So Affinity, basically, if you don't know, Affinity is basically a company that develops software that's similar to like Adobe suite of software. So Affinity Photo was basically just like an alternative to Photoshop. Affinity Designer was like an alternative to uh, Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator, and Affinity Publisher was an alternative to InDesign.
I don't know. I've never used any publisher stuff from Adobe. I just think of like Microsoft Publisher. I don't even know if they still make that at Microsoft Office.
I don't know if they do, but they might. But yeah, so basically they make alternative software that is basically run by like a one-time purchase model. So you could pay like $200 or something and you get all three pieces of software to use forever across all platforms. So that's Mac OS and Windows and on iPad as well. And a lot of people were using that as like an alternative to Adobe, which that's personally what I was doing because Adobe is very they just made a lot of terrible decisions. Not only for, I think they've made a lot of terrible decisions when it comes to like their products, but also just like the invasiveness of their software. Like it runs like a million different processes on your computer. It's constantly pinging Adobe's servers. It's not really usable offline. It's got all these awful license checking things. They want to install software that runs constantly on your computer to check whether your software is genuine. Like this is just creepy stuff, right? And for a long time, Affinity was the alternative to Adobe for people who didn't want to put up with subscription fees and basically, the crappiness that is Adobe. And the other day, a day ago, I guess, they released a all new Affinity app, which is just called Affinity. And it basically integrates all three pieces of software into one. And this is basically preceding the change where Affinity was purchased by Canva, which is like an Australian graphic design company that runs like a web-based graphic design platform called Canva. So basically, the new Affinity software is free now. It doesn't actually cost anything, and it's sort of a strange change from Affinity because in a lot of their previous communications with the community, it was said that we're able to create this software because people want to pay for it. They don't want to be locked into a subscription. They just want to pay for it once, and that was how they made their revenue. But now they've suddenly switched to this sort of freemium free model, which is a pretty strange direction to go in.
Yeah, that's definitely the model that Canva themselves have been using for quite a while, and I think that's part of what um, made it so popular. Um, Canva's pretty widely used, and it seems to me like their business model is mostly just trying to raise as much VC money as possible and then try and give away free services, and we tend to know how that ends with a lot of these tech companies. So it is concerning that they probably will eventually go down this road of either Adobe's route of constantly increasing the pricing over time and adding more monthly subscriptions, more and more, um, or I don't know. There's a lot of bad routes that tech companies tend to go down. It could be advertising it related. It could be all AI related data collection. Right now, they're not doing any of that, and it seems it seems like for now most of the changes are pretty positive, but I would definitely worry about the future of the software, which is a bit unfortunate. Um, Kevin, I saw asked in the chat, is DaVinci or Final Cut the only real alternative? Um, you could talk a bit more about that. I know that DaVinci Resolve is what you use, and it's pretty good. I don't think Affinity has a lot of video stuff right now. People were hoping for a while that they would come out um with what's it, Adobe Premiere. I forgot yeah, Premiere Pro, an alternative to that. Um, which they never did, and it doesn't look like they'll go down that route. Although I do think Canva itself has some video, like really basic video editing functionality, so it would be an interesting direction for them to explore. But yeah, nothing like that for now.
Yeah, I think it's DaVinci Resolve is definitely like pretty much, I would honestly say it's better than Premiere Pro. I think it's kind of interesting to see how that's gone. DaVinci Resolve does a similar thing. They kind of got like a free version that's available to everyone, and they have like a paid thing, but their business model is a bit different, right? They have clients in like the movie industry. That's where like their big clients are, and they pay for that professional software and equipment. Um, so I think it's definitely a different model than Affinity is. And honestly, I've honestly been pretty unhappy since Affinity was purchased by Canva because let's just say Canva has a sort of reputation in like graphic design, like circles as being sort of, I don't know, uh, amateur software, I would say, or like basic software. And it's kind of a bit alarming that, they would purchase some professional software like Affinity. And it seems like they've at least held through and made an app which in a lot of ways it seems like it does do a lot of positive things, but they did add like Canva AI tools into it, which I think is not really a privacy, it's definitely a privacy nightmare, because whenever you use these AI tools you never know when they're training information on stuff you're making, and especially if your software is like basically marketed towards artists and graphic designers and people that do creative work. I think you'll find a lot of people in that industry are pretty opposed to AI, rightfully so, because, it's based on stolen work, basically. And I
Mhm.
definitely wouldn't want my work being used to train an AI. So having that integration is unfortunate, but it's kind of just every piece of software is doing that at this point. So it's kind of just inevitable, I guess, that we would see that. So I did do a little bit of digging into the software. So just like some, I guess, first thoughts of it. It doesn't really do too many extra connections when you launch it, and I did notice it did do Sentry telemetry. So if that's something you're worried about, you can just block that at the DNS or application layer firewall option. And yeah, I think a lot of the changes are good in the software, like a lot of the options to be able to switch between different applications have all been put into one app, which is quite convenient, I've found. So I mean, I'll definitely be using it at least a little bit for now. I'm probably not going to switch over fully because the file formats aren't compatible. It's kind of a bit frustrating actually, but I think it's an interesting direction for them to go in. But yeah, I don't want to kind of derail this derail the discussion here. I feel like we should probably move into answering some questions from our community members.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't know if we have a ton of questions in the chat so far. I know I saw one comment on our forum post about the flock story. Um, uh, JG on our forum mentioned that in addition to what we've talked about flock so far, Louis Rossman has made some videos about the topic. I haven't gotten a chance to watch those personally, but I'm going to check those out. Definitely something um, that you all could look into if you want to uh, dig into the flock stuff a bit more. Without any additional questions in the chat, I think we can probably do final call, last chance for Q&A stuff. Otherwise, we can probably move towards wrapping it up. So I'll give people a minute to type if they want to ask us anything. Otherwise, we can move on to the outro.
Definitely. Just gonna take a quick look at the forum thread. Yeah, we haven't had any questions yet. I think it's sort of it's definitely that time of year, especially if you're in the
Yeah.
US. So maybe people are a bit busy with that sort of stuff. So
Yeah, Halloween coming up. Yeah, that'll be we'll see when the sun sets here. Maybe I wonder if there will be trick-or-treaters in my neighborhood. I have no idea. But because I moved into my current place here just earlier this year, so we'll see what it's like.
yeah, it's definitely
Someone in
less of a. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say somebody did mention a new question in the YouTube chat here. They asked if we have any experience with Nix or NixOS for servers. I don't personally have a lot of experience with that. I know other people on our team do, and we've written a bit about NixOS on our website. But yeah, I can't talk too much about that myself, unfortunately. It was never a model that made a ton of sense just in my mind. So I never learned how to do it. I don't know. Let me know if I should test it out, or if you want any other Nix related resources, maybe the people on our team who use it um could write a bit more about it. I do know that it's generally well liked by the people who do use it. And we've listed it as an atomic distribution on our website for quite a while now because it's pretty popular, but not for me personally, unfortunately. Have you ever used it, Jordan?
Yeah, I dabbled a little bit in it. I definitely think it's definitely a different way of using Linux. I've seen less of a use case for it on like a desktop operating system, but for like server administration, it makes a lot more sense. Um, to be able to have like a replicatable system across multiple systems, it's definitely quite convenient. Um, but yeah, I'd like to see more. Definitely like to see more like stuff related to that. Maybe that's something we can have on like the community wiki. We can have some people contribute to that, especially if you have any experience or um, there's any community interest in that. I know there's definitely like a very passionate community about NixOS, so it's definitely something we
Yeah,
can expand on, definitely.
for sure. Yeah, I would just add, like if you do have any specific questions about Nix or NixOS, definitely ask them in the questions section of our forum because there are people with a lot more experience with NixOS who could answer those questions for you in the community.
Yeah. But I guess with that being said, I'm not really seeing any more questions here. Nothing in the YouTube chat and nothing on the forum. This is kind of a sort of a quiet week, which as we said, it's Halloween in the US, so it was Halloween last night for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely a quiet week this week. So with that being said, I feel like we've given people a little bit of time to write questions. So we're gonna end up the show here. It's kind of a shorter week this week,
All
but
right.
definitely covering quite a lot of topics.
Got one comment on Twitter really quick. I've always wanted to see Jonah talk to a floating head, says Crow on Twitter, so I'm glad you're getting your wish right now. You can check our next live stream too. Funny.
That's funny. Yeah, I don't know if definitely like leave feedback on that. I'm trying to like make it more engaging, I guess, but I'd rather not show my face, just for privacy reasons, obviously. But yeah, it's a new thing we're trying, so hopefully that's like I don't know, not too goofy looking.
I like it. I think it works personally.
Yeah, I haven't seen anyone really doing this, so I feel like we're the only people using an emoji. But yeah, that's sort of unless you see any other comments, I didn't see any other ones on any of our other platforms.
Think that's about it.
Okay, let's end out the show here then. So, as usual, all updates from This Week in Privacy will be shared on our blog. that should go live in probably in the next couple of hours. So you can subscribe to that with your favorite RSS reader, and you can also just subscribe to our email newsletter, so that'll get delivered straight to your email inbox. And if you do prefer audio, we've got a new redesigned podcast page thanks to Jonah. So definitely visit that. You can visit that on our website. And it'll have a way to add it on any of your favorite podcast platforms. So you can also listen to it in audio form, which should also be coming out in the next few hours. We've just got to do some post-processing and get that uploaded. And of course, if you really like what we're doing here, we are a nonprofit that relies on our community members for donations. So any donations that you give are helping to support our team and to allow us to keep putting out these videos, articles, live streams, everything we do here, updating the website, keeping everything maintained. It all takes time, and there's people that need to be paid. So it's very, very much appreciated if you do make a donation. You can do that on privacyguides.org. And if you go to the top right-hand corner of the website, you should see a red heart icon. If you press that, you can select to either become a member, which gives you access to early access videos and other perks, such as having a badge on the forum that shows your membership. There's definitely more very exciting things coming next year for our members. So if you want to get in early on that, you can definitely consider doing that. And you can also make just a one-off donation as well. And we do support, the standard options like credit cards, debit cards, that sort of thing, as well as cryptocurrency like Monero, Bitcoin, that sort of stuff. So if that's more of your jam, you can also donate that way too. And yeah, so any donations, they're really appreciated. So definitely check that out if you want to support what we're doing here. And I guess with that being said, we will sign out here, and we'll see you next week.
All right, see you next week, everyone.
Bye.